to order. I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon, but more importantly, I really want to thank the men and women that sit to my right and my left. Over the last 10 years, a number of these individuals have been recognizing the fact that the DC plan, as was currently established in 1995, could possibly leave a whole generation of GovGuam workers in a financial situation after their retirement that they would have nothing to turn to but social welfare or their family. I was looking at some of the data, and the most successful DC member had $450,000 in his account. The average 42-year-old had $27,000. This may have been after the market fell out in 2008, but those were the facts and those were the situation. For full disclosure, I think all of you have heard enough of people mentioning about the fact that I am on a pension, and so consequently I have no vested interest in what happens in this bill. But as an interested uncle, I really want to make sure that everybody in the family is taken care of. And I want to acknowledge the fact that the board of the retirement fund has been working on this for over 10 years. I think Jerry and Lena at least have been over 10 years working on this revision. And then about 8 years ago, the public auditor called us, well, those of us that were the members of the legislature, into a meeting at the, I kept thinking it was the Westin, but I've been corrected, it's at, I can't even remember what hotel. Because when I came out of the meeting, I felt the same way that I did when I accompanied my mother and she was told that she had cancer. I felt so hopeless. I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, one of our colleagues, the late Senator Ben, didn't give up as fast as I did. He then took up the mantle. He took up the charge. He met over the last 6 years now, because we found notes from 2010. He's been meeting with these board members, and they've gone over at least 12 iterations before they sent the bill to the legislature in 2014. They had been going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because these board members are the only board members in government who have a personal liability as a result of their fiduciary duties. And I'm very happy, actually, that all of you got an email the other day from a retiree. I'll just say a retiree, I won't editorialize. A retiree who reminded all of us and this board that they have a fiduciary duty, that if they do anything that could possibly undermine the integrity and the continued viability of the retirement fund, that they would be personally liable, and they had a personal responsibility to bring a lawsuit to stop the action. I feel comfortable taking up the baton from Senator Ben Pangilinan, who had worked on this for 4 years before his untimely passing, because I was assured by the board members that the bill that they sent down was something that they would and could go to the mat with. They were willing to face any challenge to it because they felt that they had devised a plan that was going to still continue to protect the the current retirees. And so I felt comfortable taking over and assisting in pushing this through. As a result of the email you received the other day, you also know that when that person sued the board before, all of these members had their homes liened on. There was a lien placed on all of theirs until the suit was finally dismissed. So they have a personal stake to make sure that they don't send anything to us that they cannot defend. I know that over the last 3 years, many of you have received emails, phone calls, visits from people who wanted all kinds of things added to this bill. Nothing would have pleased me more than to be able to provide the things that they wanted. But I could not physically responsibly do those things because I didn't think that just because I would make a motion or substitute the bill to include some of these provisions, that all of a sudden they would turn around and they would be these board members would be the party plaintiffs in the case against the enactment of the legislation, that they would sue to enjoin this action, and it would be because no one would be able to then reap the benefits of what they had worked on for the last 10 years. And so I tried as much as possible to be as faithful to the bill as they had sent it to us. Over the course of it, Senator St. Nicholas brought up a very valid concern that he would at some point like to be able to see that the government of Guam gets out of this possibility of having to continuously pay down retirement debt. And all of us passed a resolution asking the Congress to see whether or not we could get into the Social Security. Hopefully that will happen. This plan, the bill that we've introduced, is designed so that there would be an easy transition going forward, with the deductions being 6.2 and 6.2, so that it would just float into the Social Security if and when that happens. There was also concern about some people not wanting to do that and wanting to stay in a DC hybrid plan, and so that we would no longer have the liability of a DB plan. When the bill was sent down, it was denoted or entitled hybrid bill. Since the very first day, the criticism has been that it really wasn't a hybrid bill. It was a DB bill. It may have been lighter, and it might have had a tiny little DC component in a 1% 457 contribution, but it was DB. It was a defined benefit. And for those members, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come to my office so that I can walk you through it. But for the listening audience, there is a difference between a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan. A defined benefit plan, the employer says, work for me for all these years, and I promise you this amount every year for you during your retirement, and when you die, your wife will receive 60% of your annuity, and your children, if you're not around, will receive certain amounts. Those were all defined. And it had nothing to do with what was happening in the market. We were on the hook for that. And we are currently paying down a defined benefit unfunded liability that our predecessors and some of us have created by expanding the benefits of the current retirees and not paying for it, or at least they didn't pay for it. And so consequently, there's a $1.4 billion unfunded liability that we have all agreed that we're going to pay down by the year 2031. And that will, even if we do nothing today, we have an obligation as a government to continue to pay down that unfunded liability. Even if we do nothing, we will have in every single budget going forward from now until 2031 the obligation of paying at least $141 million to pay down the unfunded liability. That continues. I thought of it now. I want all of you to understand that there are some of you in here, who are on the old DB. And you all know that your DB plan provided for 2.0% for your first 10 years of government and 2.5% for every year after the 10th year. In order to be intellectually honest, I changed the name of the bill to DB 175. Whereas those of you that are on the old DB are getting 2.0, but now you've already had more than 10 years, are getting 2.5, everybody else is going to be getting 1.75 towards their retirement. It's considerably less generous than what we had before. There are no longer any 7 years of college credits that you don't have to pay for. There's no military credits that you can get into for 5 years and not pay for. Every year that you're supposed to be on the retirement fund, you're supposed to be contributing a 9.5% of your salary towards that DB plan. In this one, your fellow senators in here who are on the DC and are going to move to the DB 175 will have to pay 9.5% on their salary towards a 1.75 per year annuity when you're getting 2.5 or 2.0. And I know that there's people that are out there hollering and screaming and saying, you're threatening the viability of our plan. What are you doing? And I kept trying to figure out a way that I could explain this. And I know many of you don't like the fact that I use family analogies to try to explain things. But to me, it's the only way that I can get to the heart, to your heart, to have you understand. And I finally thought of one this morning. Our parents in the 60s started to have children. And so they bought a house, and they had the mortgage on the house. When some of us became of age, to convince us to stay on Guam and go to the university, they built a pool in the backyard and a pool house so that it would be nice to stay at home. You could go to the university, it wouldn't cost as much. And so the mortgage on the house went up. When you graduated from the university, Mom and Dad decided they were going to help you with with law school or med school. And so they took out some money on the equity and they increased the amount. Now you've gone off, I've gone off to law school, a sister's gone off to med school, a younger brother decided not to go off to law school or med school or any graduate school, but mom and dad decided that they were going to at least help him to put invest in the company that he was going to have to start up. So 3 of us are set. We've got our education, we're doctors, lawyers, and a successful business person. Mom and dad had a younger brother. A younger child, younger than the rest of us. Mom and dad told him, we've collateralized the house to the max. I can borrow no more money, and so you're going to have to figure out how to get to school on your own. During that time, mom and dad also decided to put the house in a trust. So they can't borrow against it for your brother's continuing education unless they get your approval. And so he tries his best, and he's a football star at FD. In his last year, he has a major spinal injury. So he doesn't go off. Now mom and dad comes to the 3 of us and says, I know the house is in trust. I really would like to borrow a little money so that your brother can live in dignity. I'd like to turn the pool house into an apartment for him, expand that bathroom to make it ADA compliant so he can slide his wheelchair in and take his own shower. And people are hollering and screaming out, they're going, no way. I have my 2.0, I have my 2.5, don't you dare do anything to undermine it. Don't borrow against the house. This is in trust. This is no longer yours, mom and dad. This is in trust. And we're not going to give you approval. That's all we're trying to do in this bill, is to assure that 8,000 of our brothers and sisters who are working in government right now have the opportunity to retire in dignity. I tried to explain to someone the other day, the embarrassing thing is that my generation and his generation, he was just a few years older than I, that we could conceivably have grandchildren who would be retiring with less annuity than we are. Some of us live to 90, that we will have children that will be retiring, and there will be no way that they could possibly have a retirement annuity as lucrative as ours. So all we're asking, all these people are asking, these members of the board, retirement board, was to design a plan because they realized that there were 8,000 of them out there that needed something that would provide them with a floor. All we're asking is a floor. Expand the bathroom so he can slide his wheelchair in, take a shower on his own, and have the decency of a little house in the back corner by the pool that's his. It's not going to be your house in Talo Verde or your house in Barragata Heights that you have because we mortgaged the house to pay for your educations. That's all we're asking in this plan. And it's very simple. This bill does 3 things. It establishes a 1.75 It just says that everybody who's currently in government who are on the DC plan, that they would be able, I think you all have the chart in front of you, of, it's on page, no, just the eligibility. It's 1.75. It's still, it was copied in as the hybrid retirement detail plans, but it's 1.75. It's table 3. A comparison. It's listed as the hybrid. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the findings and fact and conclusions of, the findings and recommendations that we have in that. And all I do is I show what the original Bill 2 had and what this new DB 175 is proposing, to show the fidelity with which I tried to comply with what the retirement fund sent down to me initially. All right? And the eligibility is for all DC employees, not those of you that are on ODB, but all the DC employees. Everybody's eligible to apply for this. As you go down, it talks about the 1.75% per annum. That's in both the original hybrid and in today's defined 1.75. It's the same. Contrast that against what some of you are getting, 2.5 per year, that are currently in the DB plan, or those of us that are retired, that have received our benefit of 2.5 for the last 20 years of our service in government. The original bill and this bill also has the highest 3 years. I will, in full transparency, tell you that there were some suggestions to try to change this to the highest 5, the highest 7. I did not want to assume that I knew better than these brilliant folks next to me and the actuaries that wrote this, that there was anything that I wasn't even going to change that. The only thing that I did change, admittedly, was that I reduced the year that you could retire to 62. The original bill had 65. I'm hoping that they don't jump me as a result of it, but it was the only thing that we could work out, and at least we didn't feel that it was going to make any major change in the cost. And I contrast this to Social Security. For my generation, our retirement age was 61. For some of you, it's 62. For some of the younger members in this, it's 65. For some of your children that are now just starting into the workforce, their age of retirement is going to be 67. And there is talk in the Congress right now of raising the age of retirement in Social Security for your children to 69. So those of us that are working at age 65 don't think that's too strange, because but for I'm sure, like when I was 24, I didn't think I was going to make it to 30, and I'm shocked that I'm still around at 65, but it's not that bad. Don't laugh so hard. But the thing is that, again, the 1.75 would mean that in order to get the 85% that some of the old DB plan had, you had to work 49 years. Well, I don't know. This is my 41st year of working, so I don't know. Maybe it is possible to work to 49. But unfortunately, the 1.75 would mean that if you wanted to get the 85% that some people have received for 36 years of government service, you would have to work 49. But still, this bill was not designed to in any way provide the same platinum protections and benefits that the old plan did. We could not afford it. Even this is receiving considerable criticism and objection within the community. Just imagine if we had tried to copy the old one. I mean, I'm sure I would have already been beaten to death out there by somebody. And many of them wanted to go back. Some want to go back and buy back in. We couldn't do that because it was all those unpaid for benefits that resulted in that $1.4 billion deficit. Unfunded liability that we are having to pay down every single year, regardless of whether or not we do nothing here today. There is a penalty. We do both the hybrid bill that was sent to us and this one does allow you, if you want to, at age 55 to retire if you have 25 years of service, but it does put a fairly hefty penalty. The current DB plan has a penalty also, but it's 1/4 per month or 3% per year. This one, in an effort to not encourage people to retire that early, has a 0.5% per month. No, it's 0.25, right? Yeah. 0.25 for a full, a 0.5 for 6% per year. So you can retire early, but you're going to suffer a considerable penalty. Both the original bill that was sent down and this bill has the 5 years of service requirement that in order to vest, you have to have 5 years of service. This bill has a 9.5% contribution. And I know that there are DC members out there that are going to balk and say, why do we have to increase our contribution? Right now, for the last 20 years, the DC members have been deducted 5% on their annual salary. Those of you that are on the DB plan know that you've been paying 9.5 on yours. And the only explanation I can give to everybody is this increased amount of contribution is because you're getting a plan that gives you a floor benefit of a certain amount, 1.75 of your years of service. It provides for a spousal benefit and coverage for children. The current DC plan, I know I should have gone through the explanation, but the DC plan currently, when you retire, you take your money, whatever it is, and if you have enough, you can buy an annuity. If you don't have enough and you only have $40,000, you do as a couple of people that I know, they paid off the balance on the mortgage on their house. Figured at least the house is clear, but they have nothing to live on. So that's the difference between a DB and a DC. The current DC, the government says You contribute 5%, we'll contribute 5%. You go to the market and you invest it. And if it goes up, great. If it goes down, tough. At the end of your term, you get to take your money and go. And so that's what the defined contribution plan is. I'll discuss Senator Nicholas's Guam Retirement Security Plan, or cash balance plan, after I go through the first part of this bill on the 1.75. But the DC members currently who decide to elect to go to this 1.75 have to understand that they will be contributing more from their paycheck, from 5 to 9.5%, because they are going to be getting a plan, and a plan that's going to provide them with a floor benefit and the assurance of a defined benefit. In order to make this what it was as a hybrid when it was first introduced, there was a mandatory 1% going to a 457. A 457 is a savings recognized by the IRS, and it initially was mandatory, but in this new bill, it's auto-enrolled. Everybody has to be automatically enrolled in the 457, and you have to personally sign to take yourself off it, to disenroll if you decide to. But it would be better that you do, because you'd have a savings account, you should have a retirement plan, and hopefully at some point in the future a Social Security, in order for you to be able to live comfortably in the future. And the one thing that's new in this plan that isn't in the DC is we reestablish a survivor benefit. Those of you that are in DC right now, if and when you pass and we don't do anything, whatever was left over after you retired is all that your wife and children are going to have at the end. And if you only have $27,000 and we're currently making 85, it's not going to cut it. It's just not going to provide for even more than 1 year. I mean, I've had firemen come up to me and tell me, "Sir, I only have 80,000 in my plan. That's less than I make per year, sir. How am I supposed to survive?" That is the reason why I'm trying to push this through, is to make sure that after 30 years of being a fireman, that he has a annual income, and that his spouse is provided for it after he goes. And so it's imperative that we find something to assist in doing this. There's also provision, like the current plan, of $28.80 for children, up to 5, and they're covered until age 18, or 24, they're full-time students, lifetime if they have a permanent disability. This will also provide for a disability benefit of 50% if something should happen to you, which currently you don't have in your DC plan. And both the hybrid and this plan, copying the original bill that was sent in, had that vested members will be able to withdraw their contributions or apply for an annuity upon attaining the age of 65 or 62. So you could turn your amounts into an annuity. But when we met 8 years ago and the OPA told us about the problems that we had, and Senator Ben started this journey of trying to find a retirement fund replacement, he had 2 orders that he gave the retirement fund and himself and his staff. One, that we would devise something that provided a floor benefit, because he could not fathom the thought of having people having no guaranteed annual income after they've devoted 30 years to government. And I like one other analogy that one of my staff uses considerably. When we send our kids off to school, we send them to UOG and we ask them to become the best teacher that they can be, or off to law school or med school, we ask them to become the best doctor, lawyer, or teacher. We didn't also tell them, we will also require that you take investment classes and that you have a knowledge of being able to invest in commodities and be able to watch what happens in the stock market. There are some of you in here, I know, are quite adept at the market. And I'm very impressed with your knowledge. But not all of us are able to do that. Not all GovGuam employees are able to do that. And unfortunately, with the old DC plan, many people never even bothered to look at their plan. I mean, you know, they started in 1995. They never even bothered to look at it. The retirement fund has a website. You can go in on any given day and you know exactly how much you have in your DC plan. You can make a decision on, I want to take it out and move it into invest in these kinds of stocks. I want to be more aggressive. I want to be more safe, whatever. You can do that on the website. People haven't been able to do that. The other day at the round table, Judge Mike Berdalla, who was probably, I didn't realize how much knowledge he knew about investing. He admitted that he himself, even though he was an active participant in his DC plan, was looking at it and making investments. He's had losses. And he knows that he's not going to be able to provide for his wife if anything should happen to him. Though he would like me to change this to a 2.0. In fact, the other day I was sitting, Senator Frank, I think, saw that when we were over at the courthouse. He kept saying, 2. And I kept saying, Michael, Your Honor, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to stick to the 175. That's all these guys are going to allow me to do. Otherwise, it's going to be in front of you with a lawsuit, you know. And so even he admitted that as adept as he is in finances and in investing, that he suffered some losses. And consequently, his retirement, his DC account is not as lucrative as he would have hoped it to be. So that's the DB portion of this plan. Of this bill. There is also a defined contribution section, which I could probably just have Senator Mike do, but I'll walk us through it. The cash balance plan, which we've renamed the Guam Retirement Security Plan. Again, the eligibility is all DC members as of the date that this thing is implemented. And after a certain date, if we pass this bill today, and we have the implementation date January 2018, after 2018, this will be the only plan that government of Guam employees will be able to go into. Prior to this date, the DC members will be able to go into the DB 175, and some of them of the current DC members will be able to stay in the DC plan if they decide that they want to do it. And for people on the DC plan, there may be reasons why they want to stay. Some of them may really believe that they're going to be able to profit in the market, and they know well enough, enough about investing that they would much rather handle their own future, and more credit to them. But for those government employees who have no understanding about how to invest and what to invest in, when to take out, when to buy, when to take out, this defined this cash benefit plan will take all the money, it will pool it, and the retirement fund will be responsible for investing it. The defined benefit side of this cash benefit plan, which makes it a true hybrid, is that what happens with this cash benefit plan is that there's a guaranteed 4%. So on years that the market falls and it goes like we've seen in a couple of years, a -4, or 2 or 1, this plan will guarantee that you will always be able to compound your investment in your cash balance plan 4% per annum. There is a provision that I'm not sure if we've resolved it yet, but we did. There were some questions that were asked about if the market does more than the 4%, what happens with the 4%? As initially designed, if the market rate is more than the 4%, such amounts within internal regulations will be held in a reserve account to cover potential future fluctuations. All right? So it'll be held, and when it drops below 4, then money goes back into your account to make sure that you're always at least 4%. There will always be 4%. If you want to be able to take advantage of the high years, then you probably should make the decision to stay in the DC plan. If you think that the next 20 years before your passing is going to be all up, then stay in the DC plan. You can keep control, and all that money you can decide. Right now, all it's doing under current IRS regulations, it has to be held in reserve, and it's used to make sure that we can the retirement fund can backstop the 4% every year. And what this also requires is that your entire DC amount moves into the cash benefit plan. In the cash balance plan. This is different from the DB 175. I neglected to mention this. Right now, those of you that are in the DC plan, if you decide to opt into the hybrid 175, the actuary, Rich, will determine that your age, because you're 42 or 50, and you have X number of years in government service, that in order for you to buy back your 10 years of prior service as a senator and continue to work until age 62, that you would have to have $120,000 in your account, or whatever amount. This is just hypothetical. You would need to have a certain amount. If you were lucky and you had $200,000 in your account, $120,000 would be moved over into the DB 175 corpus, and the $80,000 over will be moved to a 457 plan. What you do with your 457 is between yourself, the IRS, and afterwards. But immediately, the 120 has to go into the DB 175. If for some reason you only have $60,000 in your account and you need 120 to be able to buy all your years back, the way the law is currently written is that the retirement this plan will pay for, the government will pay that $60,000 difference. We will pay your ante into the game. If you needed 120 to get into the DB plan and you only had 60, we would pay for that. And that's the reason why you've heard the number of this whole thing's going to cost an increase in the unfunded liability by $142 million. The $142 million comes from the actuary's study, and he figures that if 8,258 employees move over to the DB plan, into the DB 175, and they move their $320 million that they currently have in their corpus into the DB plan, that we would still be short $142 million in order to make good on all their retirement benefits that we anticipate are going to be paid throughout your lifetime and the lifetime of your spouse. And so we don't anticipate, or at least none of us anticipate, 100% of the current DC members moving over. The actuary, and I've walked you through that, the actuary has done also studies where we've looked at the possibility of everybody over age 40 going over, everybody over age 50 going over, or maybe a declining percentage will move over. In my presentations to all of you, I've acknowledged that the more reasonable thing to believe is that a declining percentage of you will move over from the DC to this DB 175. And as a consequence of that, the actuary has determined that amount, if those people move over, that the unfunded liability would be about $118 million. And if we put that in and add that on to the $1.4 billion that we're currently is the unfunded liability, and we continue to pay it off at the same percentage rate that we have been over the last several years, that our current payment for the unfunded liability is $141 million a year, every single year, even if we don't do anything. If we have this DB 175 and 5,000 employees move over, we could possibly increase it by $3 million a year. Okay? If only the 50-year-olds move over and older, maybe it's going to increase by $7 million a year, because the amount that they're going to be transferring over and their cost is going to be different. But we've taken all those into account. That the possibility of how much they would be transferring over and the cost. Under the cash balance plan also, you'll notice that the contribution rate by the employer and by the government will increase. Currently, under the DC, the employer and the employee are all paying 1.5%. Paying 5% per year. In the substitute bill with this new cash balance plan, or the Guam Retirement Security Plan, we've increased it to 6.2 from the government and 6.2 from the employee. You may ask, why 6.2? Why not 8, 9, whatever number? This number was purposely chosen, anticipating that at some time in the future, hopefully, we will have the Social Security will become available, and it won't be a shock to everybody to change their contributions either up or down. It'll just easily administratively move over. Department of Administration has been doing 6.2, 6.2, and it'll just carry over. 6.2, for those of you that have private businesses, all know that that's the current contribution for Social Security. That your contribution as the employer is 6.2, and your employee's contribution is 6.2. And so this Guam Retirement Security Plan anticipates the same thing. And we've guaranteed that annual interest credit of 4%. The other thing that this bill does is something that, again, Senators Nicholas and David John brought to the committee's attention and is very valid. For some of us in the old school, working 41 years in one place for one employer is not unusual. For you young millennials and X generation or whatever, how people do it, I don't know, but 41 months is a long time in any job. But they're constantly moving back and forth, and my heart couldn't handle the in-betweens. And but the younger people want to do that, and I know that the concern that Senator Mike and David John had was there's a lot of really bright people out in the business community who would like to be able to come into the government, and there are some very bright government employees who would like to do a couple of years outside in the business sector. And if we don't have anything that's portable between the private sector and government, then these employees are stuck with a plan that's being held up at the retirement fund, and they can't roll it over into their whatever IRA or other kinds of investments that their new employer might have. And so this is designed so that there's portability. That was something that was insisted upon. And again, it vests after 5 years in government service. The other thing that Senator Ben wanted, besides having a floor of benefits, guaranteeing a floor, was also that whatever we designed was not cost that it would be cost nominal or would be cost neutral. And so the plan that the retirement fund sent down to us was just that. If 100% moved over, it'd be it'd almost be savings, I think, but it was cost neutral. If only a certain percentage of the DC members move over, the annual increase of $3 million would be cost nominal. But we tried as much as possible to take care of that, to make sure that those two things were taken care of. I know the administration also was concerned about it not costing more, that it be as cost neutral as possible. And we've tried as much as possible in both of these to take care of that. The other thing that the administration and the committee was very cognizant of is that having a DB plan ad infinitum would be open ad infinitum would not be attractive to our investors. So that's the reason why this bill has the window to elect into DB 175 closing on January the 1st, 2018. You opt in now, or your only choice is the cash benefit plan, or you remain in DC. So we've been assured that the investors and those people that buy our bonds are really proud of the fact that the retirement fund has forced the government of Guam to continue to be faithful to paying down on the unfunded liability, and will insist on paying down, and that there's not going to be this lid that's taken off and everybody can keep jumping into the pool until 2060. It's only going to be until January 1st of 2018 that you can opt into this DB 175. After that, there is no chance of getting in. And so I thank Senator Snickles and David John for bringing that to our attention, and we've tried to address that. We've addressed the portability issue and the possibility of Social Security being addressed. The other concern, so Senator Bent's two things were taken care of: cost neutral and a floor benefit. The administration's concern was cost neutral, or if it was cost nominal, that it was going to be something that we could afford. In the bill that you have before you, where's an amendment? I think it's an amendment I'm going to be making. We're going to extend the amortization period 2 years, the re-amortization period for 2 years. The plan is not in favor of that. I'll be up front. They cannot state that they're in favor of extending the re-amortization period. Because there might be concerns. So they can't, but in order to address what I thought was the administration's concerns of could they afford the plan to afford this on an annual basis going forward for the next 16 years, I'm proposing that we extend the amortization period an additional 2 years. And so currently we're paying $141 million a year for the next 15. It was supposed to end in 2031, after which it would drop to just normal operating cost of the fund, which goes from about 29% of our payroll to just under 6%. It's a huge difference. It's like paying off the mortgage on your house, and the only thing that you have to pay after that is just maintenance of the house and your power bill. When you finally pay off the mortgage, you no longer have that $2,000 or $3,000 a month. You just have the insurance and your monthly cost of maintaining the house and paying the power bill. So if we move it out until 2032 or 33, we'll be able to spread out that cost of adopting this plan, and hopefully that'll assuage their concerns about being able to meet the cash. And so you will also notice in the
That would be the cost to
do both of these, yeah, to do DB 275 and the cash balance plan. Whatever additional costs there are, it's 175. I'm sorry, DB 175.
I'm sorry, sir. If you can just, it would cover the cost, the 2 years that would it be extended?
Yeah, the
will
2
cover-
years. Yeah, it would cover the cost of increasing the. It's like when you borrow on your house to do an extension. You just extend it an additional 2 years, and you keep your same monthly payments. Well, it's stretched out over time. In Section 6 of the bill, we have a provision written by Senator Snickles that in the event that the U.S. Congress approves Guam's admission into the Social Security, the government of Guam's admission into the Social Security plan, that we would be able to, that would be the plan, the retirement fund for government employees after that. So I think I've walked through everything that, and I'm sure somebody will remind me of what I've forgotten in a few minutes. I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to ask any questions that you wish, but I really do want everybody to understand. The reason why I have been so dogged in trying to move this through is that you'll notice that in the original bill too, the dates were for implementation were 2016. Now it's moved to 2018. If we don't get this passed now, and we wait until the next legislature, I don't know if I'm going to be here, and with all the new members, this poor board will have to explain and walk everybody through. And let me tell you, it took them a couple of years to walk me through this, to have me have an understanding. And I don't know if we can push this off to 2020. There are people that have retired since Senator Ben started to work on his first draft, first iteration in 2012. We've had 300? No, how many people have retired? We had about 90 people a year retire. DC members retire. And so that's a considerable number. And those people are now out on a limb. Some of you have come and told me stories of people you know that retired under the old DC plan. So it's imperative that we do something at the earliest possible date. So if we delay it, it's just going to push that implementation date to 2020, 2022, whatever. And as I said in the beginning, it's not that I'm uncaring. Though I have no vested interest in this, I am a very concerned uncle. I want to make sure that there's no fights within this family. I want to make sure that you don't leave your poor little brother, in his wheelchair without being able to live a dignified life. That's all we're trying to provide. And I hate it when families fight. I want us to all try to make sure that we take care of everybody in the family, whether we're related or not, or if we're going to benefit from it. It's just trying to take care of each other. And so Don't know if, do you have any questions of me or about the board members? Senator Blas.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the history on this. It actually provided the historical information with regards to the creation of the bill. But I think that what is just as important to be able to put this perspective is the why. Why is it necessary to have this before us? And recognizing that there currently exists a plan. But I think it's very important to be able to understand why, if we don't do something with it today, what is it that we have? And if nothing is done about it, what are the possibilities, good and bad? So I guess the question is basically, very simply, why is it necessary to consider this legislation before us today? Where are we today with the current defined contribution plan? How did we, what was the cell of the DC plan in 1995? What happened to this plan that got us to where we're at today? And why do we need something like this to move forward?
In 1995, the government of Guam was faced with the reality that because we had established what some said was the best retirement plan in the country, which provided those of us that went off to school in the 70s, 60s and 70s an ability to be able to come back in on our first day on the job, already have 7 years of service under our belt, and we never paid for a day of work. To pay for a plan that included provisions that, admittedly they were for veterans who had served our country, and we could have and should have found some way to assist them. Gave them 5 years of credit, and there was no contribution. Previous legislatures passed an early retirement an early retirement plan, which gutted the government of brilliant workers who had amazing institutional knowledge, gave them 15 years to pay back the years that they were able to buy themselves out in this early retirement. They started to receive their benefits the day that they left government, and they were still paying it down 15 years later. And as I understand it from the plan, some people received 13 years of service and hadn't finished paying off and have died. And, I'm sure that it'll come out and the governor will rightfully criticize me. It also includes the fact that I may have contributed to this unfunded liability by introducing an amendment to increase the survivor benefit from 50% to 60%. I admit my guilt. But being the softy that I am, when some of them came up to me and saying they were only getting $90 a month, I thought an additional 10% wasn't going to kill, but I admit that I had participated in increasing the unfunded liability. And so the government in 95 thought that you had to get out of the DB plan. You can no longer guarantee a benefit. And the trend was then that, those of us that go on all the legislative websites or newsletters that we receive, DC was the big thing that was being talked about. Let them out there and let them figure out themselves. And when it was presented to the employees, this was at a time when the market was doing very well. We had the boom here and we had the boom everywhere. And many employees who were on the old DB, seeing dollar signs, thought, wow, if I go and I do this and I invest well, I could make millions. Unfortunately, the market being what it was, there was a crash in 2000, 2008, and we never know when there's going to be a crash. There was all these things, and many of the government employees did not have, the intricate knowledge that a few of you in here have of how to be able to play the stock market. And so consequently, they're hurt. And when I looked at the stats and I saw that the person that was doing the best, or at least had the largest account, was $450,000, but that was a doctor. His 5% was a little more than everybody else's. But for the most part, people were in their 40s, nearing their 50s, and only had $27,000 to $40,000 apiece. Senator Ben and this board that was looking out for the retirement of all the GovGuam employees. It is called the GGRF, GovGuam Retirement Fund. And they all work together to try to figure out what can we do that, one, will not place us in liability for undermining the fiscal integrity of the main plan for the old the old premium defined benefit. But we can do what Senator Ben wanted, which was to provide a floor, and it wouldn't be cost prohibitive, would actually be cost neutral or cost nominal. And if we don't do anything, I know that some of you know people who you've gone to their funerals, who have come up and complained to you about the fact that they only had $80,000. I had one lady that said she took her 80 and paid off her house. And I said, so what are you living on now? And she goes, well, she's having to go back to work. And some of us may want to work at 65 and 70, but not everybody wants to. But more importantly, there are many people who don't have the fiscal capability of continuing to be able to work after a certain age period. And so it's imperative that we find some way. I know that there's criticism out there of why do we care? It's tough. They were given a chance. Nothing in life is guaranteed except death and taxes. I suppose we could be callous and say we don't need to address that. But we also should understand that there is a positive side to this. If we provide a minimum, then we know that there's going to be at least the 5,000 who go on to the DB 175. At least we know going forward, they will continue to have a paycheck that they'll be able to continue to contribute into our community. If we don't, there's going to be 5,000 people, 8,000 people, who will have nothing to contribute into the continuing economy of this island, who will be on social welfare. And at the risk of embarrassing her, I almost threw my microphone at the acting director of administration and said, well, at least the SNAP is a federal program, isn't it? We don't have to worry about that. We had to remind her that MIP housing is still ours. We have to pay half of the Medicare. If we can keep them on some kind of continuing income, they will continue to contribute to this economy. Or we can just leave them out there. We can decide to tell Mom and Dad, we want the trust of that house kept intact. It's his fault he broke his back. Let him crawl to the bathroom. I cannot, in good conscience, though I'm, comparatively the rich old uncle, I cannot allow that to happen. And I'm hoping that there are enough of you that will join me in making sure that that doesn't happen. Because I know some of us in here are already retired. There are some of you in here that are on the old DB plan. And then the rest of you are all DC. Some of us can just say, well, we're fine. But I think we all have to look out for each other, not only in here, but more importantly in the community at large. And the number that we're looking at is 8,000 people. And we have to do something.
And I think, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And I do this for the purpose of wanting to put all the questions out there. And just wanting to lay it out on the table so that we recognize and we understand where we're at and where we need to go. That said, and you did bring up the point that we could have always taken the position of not doing anything. But in not doing anything, is there any crystal ball? Is there any way, does anybody up there, is there any idea of an alternative to, for lack of a better term, make up for the sins of the past and probably bring things back up to par in moving forward? Is there any future growth that would make up for and bring it back to what people who were initially on the DC were, I don't want to say this, but for lack of a better term, promised? Is there anything that you see that could that there could be a scenario that could possibly bring that back up there so we don't have to go through this? I don't know.
Maybe. But let me have a crack at it.
Sure.
There was no promise with the DC plan. With everybody with everybody that went into the defined contribution plan, it was understood. We will contribute 5, you will contribute 5. You will have the opportunity to be able to direct your investment. If not, it'll just by default go into a safe mutual fund or whatever and gain 0.5% per year or lose or whatever. Or, as many people thought they could take their 5% and the government's 5% and they could make their millions. But that was not guaranteed. That was, in this bill, we've taken and we've now said, If you don't want to take the corpus of your savings right now, I mean your account, and put it into a DB 175, and you want to continue to handle your own investing, have at it. But please know that this lid on this pot is going back on the 1st of January 2018. You either decide to get into the pot or get out of the pot, but that's the last time it's going to open. And we want to make sure that they understand that there's going to be a new cash balance plan that all government employees will have, which will guarantee a credit interest of 4% per year. It may not be the 14 that the retirement fund had 2 years ago, but it is a guaranteed 4%. And if it should fall to a -2 like it did a couple of years ago, then that 14% will be used, the additional 10% will be used to cover that, so that you will always know that your cash balance plan will be compounding at 4% per year, which there's no guarantee about that now. Or you can stay in the DC plan. And so I know we're getting quite a bit of criticism even now to consider this, of why should we be our brother's keeper? We all have to answer that individually. But we have employees that we need to take care of, and so we try. I don't know if anybody wants to.
Senator, I think your question was, are there any other alternatives to bridge that gap with where we misfired over the last few years? And I think this bill addresses that. I think this bill answers that question. And this is why I think it does. There are two primary drivers that end in a balance that's sufficient to carry anybody through the balance of their life over retirement is time and money. And for those individuals that we're targeting, those individuals that failed, even if it's going to take a lot of money to make up for the amount of time that that they have left in their career in government. So the way the hybrid, the DC DB 1.75 plan works, simply is to spread out that cost over the balance of the over the balance of the amortization period, so that it becomes affordable to both the employee and then to the government. And then for once we've addressed those individuals, the compromise has been that going forward, we put in a cash balance plan while we're waiting for Social Security. And that cash balance plan presents the idea that for those individuals, they have the time, because their period that they're going to be working, their career is longer, and with sufficient money in the way of an increased contribution, they'll have the two influences that would give it no guarantee, but it'll give it a greater chance of success over their career.
And I think the one thing that I want everybody to understand, it's time is of the essence. There are some that are young, like this one, who's not 30 yet. There are some who are in government who are 55. Some are 60. Who even under this scenario will be retiring at 60 or can retire at 62. They don't have the luxury of 30 years of being able to invest and get that 4% per year under the cash balance plan compounded. There are those, and you know, who don't have the luxury of time to be able to do that. This DB 175 lets you buy back those years. If you made the mistake, and God help me, I shouldn't say that. If you made the decision in 1995 to leave the DB plan to go to this DC plan, the DB 175, if you are now 60 years old, will allow you to buy back your government service back to when you started. You will have to make that contribution into the DB 175 corpus. And so if that takes your entire DC account in, or fine. If it's short, then we're on the hook to make up that difference. And you will know that at 62 or 65 or 67, if we have to wait until 2018, you'll know that you'll be able to at least get a few $1,000s a month for the rest of your life, which I understand is now on Guam, male 77? Lifespan. Male, I think, is 76, and women's 80. 4 years longer. So, I mean, at least for that period that you're going to have. But the thing that this DB 175 does, it allows you to buy back your time. This cash balance plan, you just take that money and you put it in. There's no buying back anything. You just take your entire account, goes in, and you continue to work on it going forward. But
I thank you, and I think that for the purposes of the discussion, and pardon, I thought it very important to talk about the why, or why we were here. I think that we can all agree that, as beautiful and as the DB plan was, it was truly the Titanic, and that if it was allowed to continue to go into that ice flow, that eventually it was going to strike an iceberg. And so I can just imagine what this conversation would be had we kept the DB plan up to today and what it would have meant to our liabilities. So I think it was very important to have this conversation and to have this discussion of the why. And I appreciate Mr. Cruz's basic contribution to the whole thing with regards to this plan does represent what collectively we've put together, that was put together to be able to address where we need to go. If we don't address it today, what could happen and where we need to go with it. So I appreciate that, Mr. Chair.
And I want to underscore, the bill that's before us was not the first bill.
Sure, I understand. And
there were 12 iterations before that with all kinds of things. And since we introduced it in 2014, there have been several more iterations of it. So we've tried as much as possible to look at every conceivable way. Yeah. And the only, at least right now, their work of 10 years and the 12 iterations and their continued work over the last 4 years with Senator Mike and myself and those of you that came to the meeting, the roundtables, we've gone through at least 5 or 6 other iterations, and we've had like 12 roundtables over the last 2 years. And I've tried to be as transparent with all of you. I've emailed all of you what Rich sends out, which, all the questions that were asked. How much is this going to cost? How much is that going to cost? And I give that all of you have received that. I didn't understand it until just a couple of weeks ago when Ricky walked me through it very slowly, and Carlo. But the thing is that we've looked at literally dozens of ways of trying to address this. And in our collective experience and minds, this is the best way forward with couple of considerations. One, it provided the floor. Two, it wasn't going to be so expensive that the bond raters are going to jump all over us. And three, that it was going to close the lid back up so that there'd be no more DB people, and you can go to the bond market and say, the retirement fund is still making sure that the government of Guam is making their annual contributions and paying it down. It's going to be paid down at the date certain, and they're really happy with this. As I understand it, they're proud of the fact that Guam is working, is diligently working towards this. And it's not, hopefully we'll never get to the point that our neighbors to the north have, where they stop making their payments. I'm sure they would come down on us immediately, and the courts would come down on us if we stop making that $141 million a year payment. But it's not going to affect, I want the old retirees to understand, this is not going to affect you in any way. This bill is not going to undermine anything. As I tried to explain to some retirees, have you noticed your payments going down? No. Did you not get your COLA? Yes. And so I keep saying, it's still there. And these guys are going to make sure, even if I have a problem trying to figure out how to make that payment, these guys will make sure that on the day after the budget's passed, if I don't provide for a guarantee to make sure that that payment's in there, they will be in court the very next morning saying there's no provision for paying down this unfunded liability. And the other thing that I wanted to make sure when I provided the bill to all of you was I wanted, in spite of my wanting to do the 2% that some people wanted, the law enforcement things that other people wanted, all kinds of other things that people wanted, I wanted to be able to present a bill that would be considered and wouldn't have the retirement fund, who had been working with me for the last 4 years, be the first ones to court the next morning to enjoin the implementation of it. I want them on my side. The one time we did lose was when they joined the other side. So I want to keep them on my side as much as, as I would love to have taken into consideration some of the other benefits that people wanted. And I just want everybody to understand, it's just 1.75 as compared to the 2.5 that everybody's getting, that are those of you that are on DB. It's a huge difference. Just think. 1.75 for 10 years, or 17% as opposed to 25% for 10 years of your salary. It's a marked difference, but it's the best that we could. They haven't worked on this for the last 12 years.
Yeah. And thank you, sir. And so I think that was very clear. We're talking about those that are in the current DC program, right? And so this morning at the funeral, I was confronted by a bunch of people who were on the DB. They said, "Don't you dare touch my program." So, okay, we're just to make sure, because I'm sure they're watching us right now. Okay? So no, BJ is not touching your DB program. I threw your name out, not mine. I could throw Mike's too, but he's fine. Okay. Okay. And I know, Mr. Chair, I jumped in right before. I don't know whether you were going to set the parameters with regards to the ground rules. I thought that we needed to have that segue into the conversations, the discussion of the bill, so that we know it. And I'm hoping that, I don't want to take up the rest of the afternoon because I do have some questions, but I want to go to give the opportunity section by section. If I can, I know what the normal ground rules are. If I can come back in.
We'll come back. I want it fully discussed. So
okay.
We'll have several rounds.
Thank you very much.
It was Senator Rodriguez, Speaker, then Senator Torres.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, and to everybody that's here. I want to thank you also, Mr. Vice Speaker, for walking me through it a couple of days ago, because it's complicated. It's complicated to understand it and to be able to come to a conclusion on how this is going to affect not just the retirees, but also the taxpayers. The taxpayers. And so, and please correct me if I'm wrong, jump in and correct me if I'm not getting it correctly. But my understanding is that we're here with this plan, which you've been working on, and even the late Speaker Ben has been working on, to really fix up what, as Senator Blas had said earlier, may have been the sins of the past, right? Of not having a plan in place that really looked out for the best interests of our government employees. So this is what we're trying to do now, is putting an alternative on the table, so that they could, we could offer them some sort of security when they do retire. So I commend that. I mean, that's our role. I know that the board members, that's your responsibility as well to look out after the fund. And so, just this morning, I had a DOE teacher approach me and ask me about this as well. They're in the DC plan, and so they say, look, yeah, we don't know what this whole thing is about. All we know is that the plan we have now is not going to work for us, and so what you guys are doing, we believe it's something that's going to make us whole when we retire, after we're done with government service. And so I said, well, yeah, that's the whole intent of this, right? I didn't know, Vice Speaker, you also talked about this initiative wanting it to be cost nominal or cost neutral. And we talked about the scenarios of if a certain amount of employees do go into the 1.75, then there is anywhere from 3 million to 7 million, right? And so that's where now our other constituents come into play. Those who are not in the government of Guam, people that work in the private sector, or taxpayers of Guam, that want to know really what is the financial impact going to be for us now trying to fix and correct what we've done in the past. So if you, Mr. Vice Speaker, or someone there can explain on what the scenarios would be and what the impacts would be, knowing that this won't take place until 2018, right? And so if you can walk us through that, I would appreciate it if we could.
Okay. First off, the $1.4 billion unfunded liability will continue to exist regardless of if we do nothing today. We will continue to pay down on those $1.4 billion every year for that sin of the past, the DB premium. That will always continue to exist. Trying to address the sins that were, and I use air quotes around it, around the DC implementation by implementing a DB 175 will, and I'll be honest, increase the unfunded liability from anywhere from $118 to $142 million total. And we acknowledge that. And so in order to address that and the different scenarios that it could have, that $142 million paid over the lifespan, I mean for the reamortization period, would mean that we would have to increase our government contribution to the retirement fund anywhere from $3 million to $7 or $8 million. At least, I don't know, somebody can jump in on the, And but in order to try to minimize that impact, that cash impact, I'm proposing that we extend the amortization period so that we can have a longer period within which to pay that off, to take care of that issue. In order to be able to pay what the actuary believes would be the cost of paying the 470 million if all 8,000 go into this DB 175, and only moving in 130 some, and trying to address that $140 million difference, we would have to make some payments, but we spread that cost over the next 16 or 17 years. And so consequently, the impact is not as great. But I'm going to have the plan address it, or Senator Nicholas, if you want to help me with this.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the work that you and the retirement fund have put into this. I just wanted to tie it into your analogy earlier about the house and trust and the spinal cord injury son. What the reamortization would basically do is it would allow for us to extend the duration of the mortgage on the house. So, for example, let's say the house in trust has a $150,000 mortgage, and we want to take out another $50,000 to do the extensions in the back to take care of the spinal cord injury son. But we don't want to spend more than $2,000 a month, which was what we were originally spending to pay for the mortgage. In order to take out the extra $50,000 but keep the monthly payment the same, we're going to have to change the duration of the mortgage from 15 years where it's at to 17 years now. And so what we've done in the bill is we've basically written that language in here that the obligation can be extended for those 2 years so that the monthly payments stay the same. We're able to build the extension in the back, and everybody's able to take care of our injured cousin or son or brother, I forget the analogy, but we're able to address the affected party without having to create a new expense burden on the taxpayer. What we are doing is by extending the amortization, we're having to increase it by 2 more years. But the way I rationalize that in my mind is, if we had done this 2 years ago, it would have pretty much been the same thing in terms of the cost having to be increased on the contribution rate on the government side. And that's one of the, and that actually lends more argument to us needing to take action now, because as we continue to wait further on and as the liability gets paid down, what's happening is we're paying down that liability, the government's contribution rate is going down, but we here are very quick to appropriate that savings. And so by us doing this now, we'll lose 2 years, but it basically is kind of a reset of the clock, and it allows us to be able to afford this without having to take out any more expenses out of pocket.
Rich. This is Rich Wright, the actuary.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify some of the numbers that were presented. The estimates before the extension of the 2-year amortization of $3 million to $7 million, that was based on the original hybrid bill. The additional costs of reducing the